Ethan?
We're
Can't
recording
hear
now.
Ethan? Okay, okay. Thank you. So we're here today because the Northeast 130th and 145th or 148th stations multimodal access study has been published by the Seattle Department of Transportation. Chris will tell us, I thought it was a draft report, but when I accessed it, it said final report. But Chris will tell us more. And Chris Saleeba is with us from the Seattle Department of Transportation. He's a senior transportation planner there. And he was one of the people who worked on this report. We were also going to have Patrice Carroll, who has worked with our neighborhood a lot. But I don't know whether she's here today or not. But
she is.
Oh, hello. And she's not presenting today. Sorry, because of the Zoom, I'm not sure what all is here. She's not presenting today, but if you have questions, you can post them in the chat and she may be able to answer your questions. And I think we're ready to hand this over to Chris. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm gonna Chris, are you able to start sharing or do I need to give you?
Yeah, it just says host disabled participant screen sharing. So there's an error.
Ethan, I don't think I can enable, I think you have to enable Chris to share. I'm not able to do that.
You're a co-host now. You should be able to do everything.
Great. Let's see. Let me.
Yes.
Do folks see my screen?
Yes. Thank you.
Give me a second. I need to make sure this will go into my slideshow. There we go. Okay, great. Everything sound good?
Yep, I can hear you fine. You sound good. The slides are showing up correctly. Everything looks good.
Great, sounds good. All right, let's get started. Thanks for having me, everybody. My name is Chris Saleeba. I'm with Seattle Department of Transportation, and I work in the policy and planning group on transportation planning projects. I was trying to remember when we last spoke. I think it was last, was it last fall? Yeah, I think it was. I think it was around September or so. It was, no, actually might have been in the summer when we were collecting information and we had our online survey live that getting some input on the different projects that we were recommending. So at this point, we have completed our multimodal access study. So this is a final report. This is published. It is now public. And so I'm here to share some information with you all that's in the study. I'm happy to answer questions that you might have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give an overview of the work that we did as part of the study. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk about all 18 projects, but I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the projects that we're recommending that are west of I-5 and that impact the Howland Lake area. If folks are interested in projects in other areas, I'm happy to talk about those as well. So just let me know. And then I will talk about the next
Sorry,
step.
Chris, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. Folks, because we got the word to Broadview neighborhood late, if you're here from Broadview, please put something in the chat so we know that you're here as well, okay? Sorry, go on.
Thanks. And then we'll talk about the next steps for moving the projects forward and what we'll be doing over the coming years. And then we can have a discussion at the end. So before I get started, I just, I mentioned myself and my role with SDOT, and just wanted to take a moment to recognize and say that as public servants and stewards of the public right-of-way at SDOT, we know that not everyone has the same access to these opportunities. And if we want our streets and sidewalks to be welcoming for all, then we need to find ways to include folks who have barriers to participation. And we want to partner with you and be resources for moving forward. We are a city that must lead with racial equity, and Black Lives Matter. We actively recognize that we live, learn, and work on Indigenous land, the current and ancestral homelands of the Duwamish, Snohomish, and Central Coast Salish people. It's an honor for us to do transportation work that plans for the future and hopefully makes our city more just. So thank you for spending your time with me, and I appreciate your feedback today. So I want to give a little bit of an overview, recap on the study area for folks that might be new to this project or hearing about it tonight. So the study area that we primarily looked at was about a mile in each direction from the future 130th Street light rail station, which is the black dot in the middle of the screen. And so on the to the north, the boundary is 145th. To the west is the Interurban Trail. The south is Northeast 115th, and to the east, Lake City Way. So just want to be clear also that Sound Transit is leading the design work at the station and the construction of the track itself. SDOT in the city of Seattle, our role in this work is looking at how to identify projects that will make it easier, safer, and more convenient for people of all ages and abilities to access these future stations. So this work focuses on the area around the stations and the improvements that we will be planning for. Just want to give a little bit of an update on the timeline of projects. So the new light rail station at Shoreline South, 148th Street, opens or is scheduled to open around 2024. Sorry, I'll just do a little background. So we started this study in 2019. We finished our final report in 2020. The gold star is representative of where we are today. And then, as I was mentioning, the Shoreline South 148th station is scheduled to open in 2024, as well as the 522 BRT service starting. That's the project, the BRT that is on 145th, that will be running between 5th Avenue at the station to Lake City Way to the east. And then there's the potential that the Northeast 130th Street station may open in 2025, caveating that there is the potential for that because the station was technically or originally scheduled to open in 2031, but the Sound Transit Board a year ago had directed Sound Transit to advance the design work for 130th to consider potentially opening sooner to align with the opening of the Shoreline South station. And as most folks know, because of COVID, Sound Transit, like other public agencies, are experiencing budget constraints, and this summer they are looking at, they'll be making decisions on their realignment, and we will see whether or not that impacts the 130th Street station. So I just wanted to give a little overview of the community engagement work that we did during this process. So consisted really of 3 phases. Phase 1 was our information gathering period that took place in pretty much in the first half of 2019. Then we had a project identification phase where we collected input from folks and heard about the different project ideas that people were interested in, tested some ideas. And then phase 3, which was last summer, is when we got solicited input and feedback on the 18 recommended projects. And due to COVID, that process was completely online. So what we heard during our community engagement process was that community members would like more infrastructure, like sidewalks and bicycle facilities and street crossings for people to be able to choose to get to the 130th light rail station without using a car. And so a few things that we heard kind of over and over again, they were themes that came up was, the need for upgrading sidewalks, bike facilities, and street crossings in neighborhoods in the areas around the light rail stations to make it safer to walk and bike, to provide walking and biking connections along Northeast 130th and Northeast 145th, and to improve the 130th Street overpass for walking and biking. And then lastly, looking at opportunities to improve walking connections around the Jackson Park Golf Course. So in addition to our community outreach, we looked at our existing modal plans. So these would be the bike master plan, the pedestrian master plan, the transit master plan, and also identified other transportation projects that may have been occurring or just about to start. And we identified 90 potential projects, and then we grouped and combined those projects into larger corridor projects to get us from 90 to about 28 projects. And then what we did was that we evaluated and prioritized our projects to get us to 18. And then we went through another city staff and agency review process. We did our final outreach, which was phase 3 that I just mentioned. And that led us to fine tuning and making some final revisions to our 18 recommended projects. For each of those projects, we evaluated and scored the project for improving safety, improving connectivity and mobility, whether the project addresses issues identified through our community input process, equity, whether the project addresses the needs of people who are underserved, livability, projects that serve urban villages, so in this case, Lake City and Bitter Lake, and improves access to neighborhood amenities such as schools, parks. And then lastly, we looked at implementation, whether how the project considers the costs and the complexity to build. So that process led us to recommend 18 different projects. And so through this work, we identified these 18 projects and think they address many of the community concerns for improvements that could be made for helping folks walk, bike, and take transit to the light rail stations. So we do want to point out and be really clear that right now, that these projects are not currently funded. Rather, we've identified where potential funding, future funding might come from. So this is really a roadmap. This is the first step in doing the study, doing the work to identify where the needs are and to document the potential projects and to serve, as I mentioned, like as a roadmap for creating a multimodal plan. So then what we also did was that we organized the 18 projects into 3 geographic areas to allow people to really kind of focus in on projects that are most relevant to where you live. So you can see we grouped the projects west of I-5 into the west sector projects, the northeast sector, which is east of Jackson Park Golf Course, and then south and east of Roosevelt 125th as the southeast projects. The other thing I want to point out is that we then prioritize the projects based on tiers to create a network hierarchy. So what this graphic is representing is the tier 1, 2, and 3. So tier 1, those are the projects that are shown in the thickest lines. And these projects provide the direct access to the future station. So a good example of that would be the 130th Street overpass. And then tier 2 and tier 3, those are projects that connect into, tier 2 projects connect to tier 1, tier 3 projects connect to tier 3. And so the idea is that it maps out a hierarchical network. And so then like the tier 3 projects completes the connections back to the urban villages, the urban trail, or the interurban trail, and those further outlying areas. So what I put together next is a kind of focusing in on the proposed projects of the West sector. So my thinking here was, hey, we could dive a little bit deeper right now into some of the projects that are west of I-5, some of the projects that interface with the Haller Lake area. So what I'm going to do is just spend a little bit of time kind of going into a few of these, and then we'll talk about next steps. So the first project, and I mentioned it a minute ago, is the 130th Street overpass and shared use path. So as I mentioned, this was a tier 1 project. So this is the really critical connection to the west side of I-5. There was a high level of community support for this project, and this project was identified as one of the top barriers to access the station. And it's a critical connection for improving access for people walking, biking, and taking transit. So the recommendations that were prepared for the overpass would be to reduce the lane widths, to create space on the north side of the overpass for people walking and biking, and that we also would want to make crossing improvements at First Avenue and 130th, as well as crossing improvements at Fifth Avenue and 130th. I just want to point out that the crossing improvements at Fifth Avenue and 130th, these are right now being coordinated with Sound Transit as part of their station design. So that is work that is that is design work that's starting. And then we also so this is a sample of the cut sheets that we which includes the project background, the project recommendations, and then some considerations. So we put this together for each project, and then the considerations. What this offers is it provides information to both the community, our partner agencies such as WashDOT or Sound Transit, and in some cases the city of Shoreline, as well as internal departments to the city, such as Seattle Public Utilities or Parks and Recreation, and it gave us an opportunity to document some of the opportunities and or other challenges for folks to be mindful of as the project advances. So this is a typical format, and with the type of information that is provided for each project. So I'm gonna keep moving because there's quite a few of these. The next project I wanted to talk about is the North 130th Street corridor. So this is a continuation of the shared use path that I just mentioned at the overpass. And the idea here is that it's an extension of that path on the north side of 130th between First Avenue all the way to the interurban trail. This project would really, it requires a lot of coordination and study with WashDOT, particularly for crossing State Route 99. And there's also a recommendation for widening the sidewalks on the south side. When we looked at this project, we also identified a potential alternative because of potential spatial constraints on 130th to meet the needs for vehicle lanes, for bus stops, for sidewalks, and for bike facilities. that's going to be a pretty big project. And so what we also wanted to identify is a potential alternative, which would be a neighborhood greenway on North 128th. One of the challenges, that really kind of jumped out at us with North 128th, though, as a greenway, hence it being an alternative rather than our primary recommendation, is that there are still higher volumes of vehicle traffic, particularly to the west, where parts of the street is classified as a collector arterial, and the land use closer to 99 is mixed commercial. So there's larger trucks there and more truck traffic, and that street type, because of that, is less appropriate for an all ages and abilities bike facility. So pointing out some of the challenges, as well as what an alternative could be for as this idea were to move forward, for folks to consider some of those opportunities and challenges. The next project I wanted to discuss is the First Avenue Northeast improvements. So this is a key north-south connection that we're recommending between 117th and North 130th. And so this is a key connection because it's within a walkable and bikeable distance to the 130th Street station. And we heard from the community that First Avenue is a street where there is a need for walking and biking improvements. So the recommendation that the study puts forward is to look at the opportunity to reclaim the right-of-way along First Avenue Northeast on the east side of the street. So if folks are familiar with the east side of the street, and First Avenue in particular, it's a pretty wide right-of-way, and some of that right-of-way right now, particularly north of 120th, is not as defined. There's not a continuous sidewalk, curbs. In some places, there's parking in the right-of-way, in undefined right-of-way. So the idea there is to construct a shared use path along that east side. There are also a couple of elements that are part of this that build on the greenway and the street improvement work that's happening around 117th and First Avenue, and that's to install a neighborhood greenway that connects there's currently a greenway that is funded on Ashworth Avenue. So to make the final connection, so it's this little green piece right here. So it would make that connection from the Ashworth neighborhood greenway, and then it would make that final connection to 117th, which ties into the overpass, and then it would tie into the future First Avenue Northeast proposal. The next project I want to talk about is the Corliss Ave neighborhood greenway. So our Seattle's bicycle master plan identifies Corliss as a key north-south greenway between 130th and 145th. At 145th, what's exciting about this project is that it could connect to a greenway, to the proposed greenway that the city of Shoreline is working on the north side of the street. So this would function, if these were to both move forward, this could function as an intercity neighborhood greenway, and I think that's pretty exciting. The Corliss Ave Greenway would also connect to the city of Shoreline's, be a direct connection to their future 148th Street pedestrian bridge. So there is a pedestrian bridge that they are in the planning phases of working on. So for Seattle residents, it would provide a nice way to get to that bridge and using non-arterial streets. And the other thing that we would be doing in this is that we would be coordinating the connection, the crossing at 145th, as well as the Corliss Greenway would connect. The idea is that it would tie into, I think it was project number 3, which is the shared use path on 130th. So you can see how these projects are starting as they come online over time. They start to progressively build out that multimodal network. And I just wanted to give a little recap, some information on what neighborhood greenways are, and what I mean by that. Neighborhood greenways are streets that are designed to give priority to people walking and biking, and so the images on the right kind of illustrate what some of those elements are. So these are not prescriptive, but rather depending on what the needs of how to make the street safer and slower, we would use different strategies. So we might use traffic calming with diverters or speed humps. But the idea really is that we want to get cars respecting the 20 mile per hour speed limits. There would be wayfinding, so to identify the street as a neighborhood greenway. And it would also, so people know what to expect, as well as give them directionality and connecting them to key locations. So it might be connections to the light rail, but the greenway signs could also provide information to community destinations. Safer crossings. So some of the key crossings that we would want to consider, the Corliss Greenway crossing 145th. There's another greenway that we're recommending at 137th, which would cross State Route 99. So really being mindful about the strategies that we would implement to improve those crossings, and all of that work really would be with our partner agencies. And if crossing 145th and State Route 99 requires coordination and working closely with WashDOT because those are their streets. And that kind of teed up nicely to the Ashworth Neighborhood Greenway. So the Ashworth Greenway, right now, there's a funded piece that is from about, I think this is 135th south to 120th. And what we're proposing is we're recommending to complete that neighborhood greenway from 135th to 145th, and then make that crossing into the city of Shoreline. There would also be, I know that SDOT is looking at different options for crossing improvement at 130th as part of the Ashworth Neighborhood Greenway, and I don't think that's been determined yet. But I think a crossing improvement would be part of this as well. So I want to talk a little bit about next steps. So the Multimodal Access Study, the recommendations that came out of this work, we will continue to work with our friends at the Office of Planning and Community Development to continue our coordination with them on the development of the station area plan. So the station area plan is a planning process where OPCD is looking at options for the future development and investment within in the area of the stations within a 10-minute walk. So we'll continue to work with OPCD and the community to further refine and identify needed mobility improvements that sync up with their process around land use and housing. And this will be these in a way kind of tee up the transportation recommendations that will feed into OPCD's station area planning work. Funding. So as I mentioned, as part of this study, we identified potential funding opportunities for each of the projects. And I'll just kind of go back the slide. There's this little section in each piece that says potential funding sources. So, that could be, in this case, could be the Seattle Neighborhood Street Fund, the future Seattle Transportation Levy, coordination with the city of Shoreline on the crossing improvements. So we've kind of did a broad look to identify where potential funding could come from. But excuse me. But I do want to point out and be really clear that even though we identified where potential funding opportunities, but we do want to note that these projects are not currently funded. Again, this is a roadmap, and this is our planning. This is our early planning work. So, even though these projects have been identified as priorities, for this area, these projects still need to compete for citywide resources. But in addition to pursuing potential funding opportunities within the city, we will continue to look for opportunities to advance the design and construction of these projects through funding collaboration with agency partners such as WashDOT and Sound Transit. The bus network. So before the station opens, King County Metro, in coordination with Sound Transit, will plan the restructure of the bus service in advance of the station opening to complement and connect, in particular, the urban villages to the station. But we can't say exactly when that work's going to happen. In terms of the year, because we're not exactly sure when the stations will open, but our understanding is that will be a couple years before the stations open. We will continue our coordination with other city projects. So we'll take the concepts that are developed in this work, and we'll work with other city departments such as Seattle Public Utilities and Parks. And then we're also going to continue coordination with our partner agencies. So, we'll continue working with WashDOT and Sound Transit, to support our safe and convenient access to the future light rail stations. So the projects in particular that we're actively engaged in right now includes, the coordination with Sound Transit on the 130th Street station design, the State Route 522 Northeast 135th BRT project that's led by Sound Transit. And we're also coordinating with the city of Shoreline on the 145th Multimodal Corridor project. So there's a lot happening in the area, and we're actively participating and coordinating with our partners. And then lastly, the parking and curbside management. So Sound Transit and SDOT will work together to study on-street parking within approximately a half mile to the future light rail stations. And similar to the bus network, these studies usually begin about 2 years in advance of the station opening. So that's it for me. I would love to open it up to questions. I went a little bit longer than I was expecting, but I had a lot of content. So I would love to open up the floor to questions.
Great, thank you, Chris. That was fantastic. As Anastasia mentioned in the beginning, there are 2 ways to answer questions. We have a few already in the chat here that we can take, or if you would like to be unmuted, Ethan will unmute you if you use the raise your hand function. So we have a chat here, or a question here from Euphoria. She writes, question for end, slide 8. Are these in order of priority?
I am trying to get back to my, let's see, I lost my little viewer. I can answer your question. So as I met, which project was it?
She said slide 8.
Slide 8.
Yeah.
It came up when you were listing all the projects.
I'll just use the master. So this is the master map of all the projects.
One of them, it was listing connections to the park versus sidewalks. It was a bullet list of about 8 items, but it's okay. You can skip it if you can't find the slide.
No, that's okay. I'll in more general, what I want to just kind of touch back on is the priority of the projects. Is that the prioritization, the way that we established it is more about the dependency of the project for that other projects are dependent on, right? So that's when I was talking about the tiers, right? So the 130th Street overpass, that is a high priority project, and we listed that as tier 1 because if we, just to take a project, the 137th Street neighborhood greenway up here, we're saying that's a tier 3 project because that reaches out into the neighborhood. But for the 130th Street, for that project to be effective in getting people to the station, it's dependent on the Roosevelt piece getting built. It's dependent on Corliss getting built, and then it's mostly dependent on the tier 1 130th Street being built. So does that make sense? You can kind of think of the thick projects as like the trunk of the tree, and then these are branches that are going out.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering about near the station, near 130th and Roosevelt, and that big thick connection. It looks like that one path that's well established is a high priority. But then on one of them, there was a connection on 8th between the big thick blue line and the stage 2, the tier 2 line. There's a path there. So I didn't see the right side, the east side of the freeway has a big map, but
correct. I focused in on the projects that I talked about. I zoomed in on the west side. If there's a project that you would like me to talk about on the east side, I'm happy to do that. I just edited down because of a function of time. Is there a project on the east side that you would like me to talk about?
I was just looking at that triangular block and the park access immediately at that intersection of 5th and
could you reference the
130th.
project number for me?
Say that again?
Could you reference, do you see my screen?
Yeah, it says 15, but
Okay.
it wasn't the line of 15, but really that area.
The intersection of 130th and 5th?
Yes, and yes. Yeah, and Roosevelt, the walking there, are they gonna, yeah, maybe just that diagonal. I'd be interested to know if they're gonna put in the walking path continuing like to connect 17 to 1. Is that gonna get a shared path?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the shared use path right now is proposed on 130th between the interurban and 5th Avenue. At the station, so from 5th Avenue going east on Roosevelt, there is work, there's design work that's happening to accommodate future bus stops for people getting to the station by transit, as well as improving the sidewalk conditions. Number 15, we are proposing, I'm gonna get out of my slides. I don't know if I can do that. It's not letting me. I wanted to go to, give me a second. I'm gonna go to the document, and I'm just gonna pull this up for you so you can see that. Number 15. There you go. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit there. So what we're proposing at 5th is to continue the bike facility that's on 125th. And we want to have a bike facility on 130th. We're looking at making crossing improvements at 8th and at 10th. Because we're proposing a neighborhood greenway at 8th as well. And in addition to the bike facilities, there would be looking at making sidewalk improvements as needed on Roosevelt Way. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we have a question from Sean McEwen. He asks, what is the best way for our community to continue to lobby for funding for these projects?
Hey, that's a great question.
And then in tandem with that, someone else said, are you looking at federal funding for these projects? Maybe you can address both of those together.
Yeah, those are really good questions. So in terms of opportunities for finding funding is there's a community resource guide that SDOT has put together, and I can put the link to that in the. Do we have a chat that I could put links into?
Yes, we do. It's there and people are chatting away.
Yeah, for some reason I can't find my way back to the chat after I closed it. So just
This is Ethan. I can put things on the website, follow up message too.
Navigating Zoom. So in terms of letting folks know that you're interested in these projects, hearing your support for the projects goes a long way in terms of showing support for the work that we've done. That includes input from the community, getting in touch with your council member, and as these projects come, as more work comes online, is to use this as a resource to provide direction and feedback to folks. So as a way, it's this. What I'm trying to say is you have a document now that you can point to. So use that document to reinforce your message. Sorry, that was clunky.
So if I understand correctly, you're suggesting we take the proposals here and either advocate for or in support or against some of them to our council member?
I would, that's one, that's one avenue in terms of, chatting with or having conversations, with council member Juarez, and as well as other projects, that are coming online. So, for example, if there is a future transportation levy, pointing to this study as materials to support getting funding through future levies, and using that to support your ask.
All right, Celia chatted. Have you considered improvements to the sidewalk on south side of 145th, a treacherous walkway?
Yes, so we are coordinating with the city of Shoreline on 145th. So between State Route 99 and I-5, Shoreline is leading a, I don't want to call it they're redesigning 145th. And so as part of that work, you may know that on the north side, Shoreline is completely redoing their sidewalks. On the south side, because this is a Shoreline project, but it does have impact to the Seattle side, there will be improvements to the sidewalks where there currently are obstructions that impede ADA access. So by that, I mean, if there are areas where that are not passable, say for somebody in a wheelchair, that those areas would be improved. But just to be clear, there's not a plan to do a wholesale new sidewalks on the south side of 145th. It will be more in tune to spot improvements to make that sidewalk more accessible and usable for people.
Thank you for explaining that. I guess I'll read my own question here. I noticed the Holler Lake Circle loop was left out, other than that potential backup greenway on North 128th, even though we have quite a few not friendly pedestrian conditions around there because people drive about 40 miles an hour around that loop. So I'm just wondering why that area was left out, because that will be people walking to 130th, and just curious if it's because it's classified as that collector arterial. And if that's the case, is there anything that we could do to get it reclassified?
Hey, that's a great question. So there is the Ashworth Greenway that's funded, that is so that will be up between 130th and 120th, and then the Greenway on 120th, so that east-west connection. Your point about 128th, that is a valid point in terms of the challenge of the arterial, and declassifying is not, it's a process. It's something that we would have to explore and study and look at. There's also buses in some of on that area, in that segment. I think it's between like Ashworth and just almost to Meridian. I forget, I don't recall it, the exact extent of it. So there are some challenges there. It doesn't mean that 128th is off the table. That it is in there as an alternative, to 130th. I think we acknowledge and recognize that there's that's potentially a good connection as well. The other challenge with 128th as a greenway is the connection at State Route 99. And so there would need to be some sort of signalized crossing at State Route 99. And so we need to be kind of thoughtful in working with our WashDOT partners around where the frequency of those crossings, those suggested crossings at State Route 99, and then how that would work, because it's not too, it's only 1 block or 2 blocks off of the 130th signal. So there's some consideration there as well.
Okay, thank you. I'll send you an idea how to move people from 128th to 125th and over Aurora. Thank you. We have a question from Don Thornton here. Do you know the timing for 130th sidewalk improvements? Is it dependent on which of the 2 dates applies for the 130th station?
So as I mentioned, these projects are not funded. So the first piece of that is that there would need to be funding for this work. And so, as I mentioned, the projects need to compete with other city priorities. But one of the pieces that is new to this equation is that there's a new light rail station at 130th. And one of our goals is to get people to this station. About 50% of the people that are going to be arriving and coming to and from the 130th Street station will be getting there by walking and biking. So we know folks are going to be walking and biking from the community, from the neighborhood to the station. So this study is really elevating the importance of that and documenting that. So in terms of when it will happen, there's an unknown there. Our first step was getting this information documented, identifying these projects, getting the community in support of this work, and now we can make our case. Now we can make our case about why this is important, and make that case to why it's important, and with respect to other city priorities as well.
Thank you. Robin Randalls writes, in terms of design, is there an effort to separate pedestrians from bicycles, minimizing shared paths where possible, or widening shared use pathways?
Hi, Robin. Yes, and one of the, I'm going to just generalize and say that there are some significant challenges in some places. And for example, the overpass. We know that WashDOT is not going to be replacing that overpass anytime soon. So, the objective there was to really carve out as much space as possible for a shared use facility. on the overpass. And then for this work, what we considered was, because of challenges, the spatial kind of demands on 130th with transit, would be to reduce the vehicle lanes potentially. And I think our proposal is also to reduce the vehicle lanes on 130th. But that still needs to be studied. But the idea is to minimize crossings from say a two-way facility, a directional facility on each side of 130th that then segues into a shared use path, and reducing crossings and conflicts potentially at first. There was an interest in maintaining a continuous facility type on the north side of 130th. So in other areas, we are looking at where the space that we have to create as much separation as possible, and then also looking at adjacent routes and or both when there's the opportunity to do that.
Forrest Baum asks, has SDOT reclassified streets recently?
Great question, Forrest. I know it's happened in places. The one example I think off the top of my head is 14th Ave in Ballard. I'm pretty certain where the Gembins Skip Park is. I believe that was reclassified. That's the one that comes to mind first for me.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chris. That is all of our questions in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions you want to put in or raise your hand for, or unmute yourself and ask, I think, at this point? Patrice, do you have anything that you want to add or comment on?
Sure. I just want to thank everyone for participating in some of the online community conversations we had this past summer and fall. And I'm not sure if you had a chance to review some of the findings, but we have some links on our website, so you can see all of the feedback that we got from people. And we're, again, using that and all of the information that we've gathered through the events that Chris referenced earlier in his presentation to come up with what we call a draft station area plan. And we're hoping to release that soon. And we'll be reaching out to you after that plan is released and wanting to get your feedback, and would be happy to come back to your meeting and talk specifically about that draft plan.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Patrice. Let's see, I just saw here that Susan Stillman put in a question. What about access from underserved neighborhoods in Northwest Seattle coming via 130th?
And can you clarify your question?
Yeah, people in Northwest Seattle are not getting light rail. The bus service has been cut down to practically nothing. From where I live, it's a serious walk. It's a solid mile up to the library just to get a bus. And it strikes me that getting over to the light rail would be the best way to get downtown. And I would love to see better access in terms of, serious connections there.
Thanks, Susan. No, I agree. The investment in high capacity transit, we should look for all opportunities to connect all of our neighbors and communities to make it easy to get to that station. So, for this work, we had to define a boundary. Unfortunately, we had to create a station area, and that that led us to the boundaries of kind of connecting to the interurban trail, that regional bike connection. But to your point, you need to be able to also get, from further west or further northwest to this station. Unfortunately, that was outside of the scope of this work, but I would anticipate that King County Metro might be looking at that as they look at their bus restructure and providing bus access to the station, given that, as I think I mentioned this earlier, the other 50% of people getting to the station will be getting here by transit. So there's an opportunity, I hope, there.
Forrest Baum asks if you could repeat the name of How to Advocate.
I'm not quite following, Forrest.
Oh, you said there was a toolkit or something? And
Oh, yeah. It's called the Community Resource Guide.
Thank you.
It's a guide that SDOT put together a few years ago, and it provides it's kind of a toolkit of sort that offers information on funding opportunities and some advocacy information. Thanks for clarifying, and nice to see you.
Sean McEwen, who's our land use chair for the Holler Lake Community Club, asks, does WashDOT have any plans that would complement this study? 99 and 145th are big barriers for pedestrians/bikes moving into/out of the Holler Lake area.
Great question. So for 99, SDOT right now is awaiting information about a grant to do a study. Sorry, it's more of a study. It's a plan, I believe, for State Route 99 for improving pedestrian facilities along 99. And I believe that's from. I'm not exactly sure the exact extent, but I'm pretty sure it's from the tunnel to 145th. So it's that entire northern corridor. My understanding is that we should know more about whether or not we receive that grant later this year. So that would be excellent. That's we need to do that level of work on State Route 99. And then on 145th, there's a lot of projects that are happening on 145th. There's a lot of good work happening there. So as I mentioned, City of Shoreline is leading the work. That's the corridor between SR 99 and I-5. Sorry, I just had to reorient myself. And they're looking at pedestrian improvements, and as I mentioned, as part of that, Seattle would see improvements on the south side as it relates to ADA improvements. WashDOT and Shoreline are coordinating and working, and we're coordinating with them on the roundabouts that are being planned at the I-5 interchange as it relates to the new 148th station. And then the BRT that is being designed right now led by Sound Transit, that is from I-5 to Lake City Way, and there would be pedestrian improvements around those bus stops. And in addition to that, here's an example of how we are actively coordinating with our agency partners, is that for the BRT work, they have identified that there's a station access allowance to the BRT station. So that means there's a small pot of money to look at bike and pedestrian improvements to get to those BRT stops. So for example, some of the projects that we know that they've looked at as candidate projects for that funding is the Greenway on 143rd, is looking at we have a little bike and ped connection on 30th that goes from 143rd to 145th. So we're excited to see our partners referencing this study to identify where there's potential collaboration efforts and funding opportunities with them. So there's a lot happening on 145th. And one of the things that was really important in this study is to have a document that really captures all of that work, because it's kind of a web.
Great. Last call for questions or comments or anything for Chris before we wrap up the meeting. All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening and letting us know about all of the exciting work that's happening. And Patrice, thank you for joining as well. And thank you both to your teams for the very detailed study that you guys have done and all the different options and really taken into a lot of people's feedback and a lot of different factors. I know I'm appreciative to live in a city and a place that is taking this much care to look into it. So thank you all, and we look forward to the next steps to hear what's happening and how we can get involved.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you everybody for joining, and have a nice evening.
I apologize again for messing up the meeting ID.